Welcome to Beyond Headlines with Ngullie. Moi kan jawan chokra homoi de ena koi nai je moi kan Mizo maiki kan Mizo chukri kan do tai kan do bishi bhal ase. Tai kan do maha sundur ase. Aro sundur na thakile bi sundur na thakile to gola awaz to bishi bhal thake. Gana kan de bishi bhal ase. Aro gola awaz bhal na thakile chehra bishi bhal thake. Enna moi kan ena hisab moi kan Mizo chukri la kotha poila moi kan jawan homoi di tukan koi nai she aur Mizo maiki koile to ekdam bhal lagi kina moi kan aise moi kohima de ekta mahavidyalaya de puria homoi tade Mizo chukri ekta puri thaise taibi itu chukri do ekdam sundur aur ini manu sob lo de milina thaibole pare ekta chukri thaise tai tu Mizo chukri do to moi kan la mahavidyalaya de maiki mota sob tai ke bhal lagi thais de diso ekdam manu bi bishi bhal ase aro sundur na sundur to jo 2-3 saal nishna ge de itu moi nahi jo 2 saal 3 saal nishna de moi tu Mizo maiki laga purana satni ekta look paise to khisa mari na itu sunduri Mizo la maiki la kotha bi ulai laise to itu satni bra koise itu Mizo maiki kun itu moi kan la mahavidyalaya khan manu mota maiki kan sobra tai ke bhal lagi tai itu Mizo maiki to itia to lotha manu lo de shadi hoise koise lotha la ghor de jaise koise aur tai do bacha bi paina Dimapur de boya ase Dimapur na kunba jadi osorde na boya ase na koise. Wherever you are, Marina, if you happen to be watching this, congratulations to you, your husband, and your family. I don't really think there are many Northeastern communities whose women continue to be celebrated and admired in wholesale the way we do Mizo women. We celebrate their beauty, their body values, their modesty, and their demure nature. Of course, there are also some really bad apples out there who have lost their way like most modern youths today have. But generally, Mizo women continue to be seen in positive light. Unfortunately, in case you might be thinking, but you are a Mizo man, things will now be more difficult for you to find a Mizo wife, in case you're thinking about it. Forget finding even a Mizo girlfriend if you're a non-Mizo person, if you're a non-Mizo man. Now, time's hard. The reason is the Mizoram State Assembly has rolled out a new legislation that supposedly, ostensibly seeks to protect the community's tribal, cultural, and genetic heritage. Moi bi Mizo maiki to ekdam mon bra manzur ase mon du kotha do apni Mizo mota nohile do Mizo maiki lo de shadi kori bole olop tan hoi jai na ye nohile bi bhavna hisab ekdam majburi hobo na ki itia do kile mani Mizoram rajya laga Vidyan Sabha bra ekta kagos ulai dishe tai kan aza bunai dibole kagos ulai je aru itu kagos do aza bunai dibole tai kan na bunau ini bunawliya ase na hisab de bra ulai dishe itu aza hisab kun Mizo maiki bahar manu laga ghor de jai nohile bi dusra manu laga ghor de jai tai do Mizo maiki ase koina namani jawo kun bahar manu la ghor de shadi kori loi itu laga aza tai khan la rajya la Vidyan Sabha ra itu lai dishe itu kagos la nam do Mizo Marriage and Inheritance of Property Amendment Bill 2026 itu aza bra kwado ena kun Mizo maiki bra dusra manu Mizo nohwa mota laga ghor de jai shadi kore itu maiki aro tai laga bacha aro tai la pote khan grandchildren itu maiki aro tai la bacha aro tai la pote khan sob Mizo laga khun na hoi jawo ina hisab aza itu Mizoram sarkari bra kagos bunai ase itu Mizo maiki kun bahar manu Mizo noha manu mota logode thagi jawo tai do Mizo manu nohoi jawo mane tai khan do Mizo manu laga sanskriti Mizo manu la parampara Mizo manu laga kanun aro parampara laga faida tai khan na pawo khawle na pariwo eku faida nohoi jawo tai khan karni do kile mane tai khan do itia do bahar de shadi hoise tu maiki khan do itia do Mizo maiki ase ena nolo to parampara la kanun de bi tai khan ekku faida loi na khawle cholawle na paribo benefits ekku faida na thaki jabo kile mane tai khan do dusra manu la ghore jai shi do itu azabuna ule thake hisab ra do Mizo ase kuina tai khan namani jabo tai khan aro tai khan laga bacha khan bi schedule tribe moi khan do schedule tribe kuina itu moi khan laga jama lak moi khan ge sarkari bra di na ase aro tade bra moi khan faida bishi bhal loina cholawle pare pura likha hoile dibi paisa la kotha de hoile bi to schedule tribe laga naam bra sarkari laga hat pra tai khan faida ekku na pai jabo itu Mizo maiki kun bahar Mizo noha mota lo de jai Mizo noha la ghor de jai tai khan itu na hobo Mizoram sarkari kwa hisab itu nutun kanun kakos do nobuna ke de itu sarkari bra tai khan so much phitore dangor jama khan aro matha khan aro maiki khan la jama khan lo debi kotha bishi kwa bishi de itu kakos to ulai dia ase na kwa ase aro tai khan itu de aza bunai diule kotha kwa bishi de tai khan koise tai itu sarkari khan bra itu azado bunai di no ulai dia ase to kwa hisab Mizo maiki khan bishi bra bahar manu laga ghor de jai ase koi ase itu karni bhoi jinta kotha la ula karni itu kakos dia Mizo maiki khan bishi Mizo noha manu nohile bi dusra manu bahar manu khan laga ghor de bishi jai thaki ja ase kwa ase bahar manu mane Mizo manu noha khan itu desh bitor de hobole pare moi khan la desh bitor de raja dusra naga manu ho pare Meghalaya Bihar manu nohile bi tu nohile buka manu bahar manu tai khan lo de bishi ja ase kwa ase to itu la jinta moi la maiki khan so polai ja ase wina manu la gore thaki ja ase kene itu jinta hisab ra itu aza ko kagos bunai dia to Mizo maiki khan ra bishi bag bahar manu la gore jai ase itu rukhai di bole itu laga aza ulai ti ase na ko hisab ekbar hisab de do itu desh pura de nijor somaj nijor jama phitor de shadi guria manu khan do Mizoram te hi bishi thagise ko ase noli tate hi bishi ase na ko ase jama ekta idu National Council of Applied Economic Research idu koi na ekta kagos ulai di she tai kan sal 2016 de itula excuse me itula kagos de koise desh pura de manu kiman bra nijor jati nijor manu lo de shati kurina ase tai khan do 5% imani ase man chutu 5% ase kwase hole bi Mizoram de do 55 excuse me 55% Mizo manu khan bra nijor manu phitor te tai khan so much phitor de shadi korea koise 55% tu do desh de sob milai lebi Mizoram de hi sobse bishi ase ena ko ase etu hisab sale to Mizoram sarkari bra Mizo manu laga parambara Mizo manu laga sanskriti nijor gor phitor te hi rakhibole ena laga aza ulai di she pare nohile be na bhapna hisab te to itu ase Mizo Marriage and Inheritance of Property Amendment Bill 2026 yade bra to khisa do sob angrezi bra koi diwa ro kile mane moi khan TV channel Northeast manu bishi sai itu HornbillTV do to naga manu ekla hi nohoi tu moi khan phitor la kotha khan khisa khan doini naga misra pura koi diwo li itu kan do sob jaga itu Mizo laga kotha ulai je to in moi khan desh phitor de Northeast phitor de bi sob rai tu kan kya se goina asorit la kotha goina ula se itu karni moi yate bra do o nagamis la do ini koi di share yate bra do angrezi bra moi khisa do koi diwo to tai khan do nagamis na jane bishi bhag to bahar manu gan do itu upor de omkho de nai tia karni to omkho nai moi khan holi me manu sa hisab kwa hisab khisa hisab do naga manu aro Mizo manu khan do bahar manu desh manu ekla na hoi gena buga manu participan la gorde ja shadi kuri ja bi bishi hwa se na kwa se tu to moi kwa ni no khodo nai moi kan kiman jai se na jani tu holi sabole paria to edu Meghalaya, Manipur, Assam, Tripura khando iman sanskriti dusra log de shadi kuri Korea manu to iman nai na sabole noile bi bhavna te manu bra koi edu karni edu dusra manu nagamis na jania manu khan laga namra edu Mizoram sarkari laga aza khisado kito kya se sob angrezi bra ekbar bra aro moi koi diwo. The Mizo Marriage Inheritance of Property Amendment Bill 2026 is probably one of the most significant legislative moves that the government of Mizoram has taken in the recent years. And maybe I'd grade this particular legislation up there among the big ones, including the Mizoram Peace Accord of 1996. By the way, in case you might not know, Nagaland is known for insurgency. Tripura is also Manipur as well. And Assam, of course. And most people don't know that at one point of time, Mizoram used to have insurgents like us. Mizoram used to have its own insurgency movement. The Mizoram Peace Accord in 1986 between the government of India and the Mizo National Front ended the insurgency and violence in the state. Now, our topic for today is the Mizo Marriage and Inheritance of Property Amendment Bill 2026. There was about a week ago, the Mizoram Legislative Assembly passed the bill. The content of this particular bill sought to alter the scope of the state's customary law in regard to marriage and particularly the question of inheritance. Simply, here's what it meant. The bill stipulates that Mizo women who marry outsiders, that is non-Mizo men, they shall not be considered Mizo anymore. Mizo women who marry non-Mizo men shall, along with their children and grandchildren, shall no longer be considered or be treated by the purview of the Mizo customary laws and provisions for property inheritance. In other words, they are foreigners. Chief Minister Lalduhoma introduced the bill earlier. Now, I didn't watch the assembly proceedings, but reports say that the legislation was actually a modification of a previous law, the Mizo Marriage, Divorce and Inheritance of Property Act of 2014. Now, the suggestion was that the 2014 legislation may have needed modification or some kind of changes due to emerging social realities. Interestingly, one report said that the changes were required due to also, strangely, if you may take note, due to representations that were received from various organizations like, our women are getting married and they're running outside, please stop this, kind of representations. The way it was reported sounded like that. Now, Mr. Lalduhoma reportedly explained that Section 2 of the existing Act covers all marriages involving men and women in Mizoram. However, under the amended provisions, the Act will apply only to marriages where both parties are Mizo persons, or at least where the male partner is a Mizo man. Now, these are the proposed amendments. Mizo women marrying non-Mizo men shall no longer be governed by the Mizo Marriage and Inheritance of Property Act or by the Mizo customary laws, meaning they are no longer Mizo persons per se. Technically, that's how the legislative proposal translates the language of change in this regard for Mizo women. The Chief Minister explained that such women, their children and their grandchildren, would not be regarded as Mizo persons under the Mizo customary laws. Now, further, they wouldn't be entitled to claim scheduled tribe status or benefits, and this is an exceptionally big one. Now, when all these reports emerged in the media, I think the outrage was extremely swift and immediate, especially from women's organizations. The strange thing here is the Chief Minister said that the amendment was drafted after extensive consultations with prominent civil society organizations, bodies, and statutory institutions. These groups included one of the largest Mizo women's organizations, the MHIP, and the Mizoram State Commission for Women, Young Mizo Association, and the Mizoram Law Commission. A leader of the YMS Central Committee was reported to have said that the proposed change to Section 2 was recommended against the backdrop of a growing number of Mizo women marrying non-Mizo men. That was what was reported. According to him, the provision that such women and their descendants would cease to be recognized as Mizos and ST people may act as a deterrent. He was reported to have added that the amendment could also serve as a safeguard against what he described as the possible social assimilation of the Mizo community. The passage of the bill marks a pivotal development in the state's legal framework governing personal law and is expected to generate discussions across social, legal, and constitutional spheres in the days ahead. Now, as I said earlier, when this news was reported, the outrage was immediate and swift, especially from women's organizations. Their criticism centered on the forfeiture of Mizo tribal identity for women who marry non-Naga persons. So if you are a Mizo woman who married or marries a non-Mizo persons in the future, what are the stakes you will lose? Some of the key points of concern and criticism include this. Number one, loss of customary and legal status for women who marry outside the community. Now, critics say the amendment says a Mizo woman who marries a non-Mizo man will no longer be governed by Mizo customary law, meaning she and her descendants will lose recognition under those traditional laws, including inheritance rules. Number two, withdrawal of scheduled tribe status for women and their children. That's the second impact. Under the new law, such women and their children would not be entitled to claim scheduled tribe status for the purposes of customary law, and that's a provision that opponents argue effectively penalizes women for exercising marital choice and undermines constitutional protection in this regard. Number three, seen as gender discriminatory. That's one of the main impacts here. Women's groups like the MHIP, said to be one of Mizoram's largest women's organizations, reportedly argues that the bill is inadequate. They argue that it's potentially unsafe for Mizo women because it applies penalties only to women and not men, and finally that too for exercising their marital right to be with whoever they want to be with. Number four, another impact is the lack of stakeholder consultations. As I said earlier, organizations representing women have said that they were not properly consulted during drafting of the bill. Now, this raises concerns about inclusivity and transparency in lawmaking on issues directly affecting women's rights. Now, as I stated earlier, it was reported that the changes were drafted after extensive consultations and after receiving suggestions from prominent civil society organizations and statutory institutions. Now, these groups, according to reports, included one of Mizoram's, as I said earlier, biggest organizations, MHIP, and also included Mizoram State Commission for Women, Young Mizo Association, and even the Mizoram Law Commission. However, it was the MHIP itself that expressed a lot of unhappiness, saying, hey, you guys didn't come to us for consultations. Now, the other side, I'm very sure that the amendment has a lot of legislative support, of course, and at the party level too, including its women's divisions. Their leaderships would surely work in cooperation with the state government's vision. Supporters of the amendment are reportedly defending it, and of course, they're calling the Mizo Marriage and Inheritance of Property Amendment Bill 2026 a mechanism to protect, by extension, Mizo cultural heritage. The pro-bill argument is that the amendment can regulate inter-tribal marriage and preserve customary norms of the Mizo people and Mizo communities. Now, opponents, especially those who are not of Mizo descent or are outside of the Mizo community, may claim that the amendment may institutionalize discrimination. Discrimination at the institutional legal level. That's one of the criticisms. This means it could face legal challenges for conflicting with constitutional equality principles. The media quoted an unnamed leader of the YMA, which I'm assuming is the extremely influential Young Mizo Association. The YMA leader was quoted as having said that the proposed changes were recommended against the backdrop of a growing number of Mizo women marrying non-Mizo men. According to him, the provision that such women and their descendants would cease to be recognized as Mizos and Estes may act as a deterrent. That is, deter them from marrying outside the Mizo spectrum. The YMA leader also reportedly stated that the amendment could also serve as a safeguard against what he described as the possible social assimilation of the Mizo community. So now, during the course of programming for this topic for this show, an extremely interesting question came up. Mizoram is such a tiny state with a tiny population. So the question is, are there any examples of nations or countries or communities across the world that banned marriage to outsiders, which eventually led to inbreeding and affecting its genetic pool? Are there any examples of such populations? Now, first, I'm not sure you know what, I'm very sure you know what inbreeding is. Inbreeding is marriage or relationship of closely related people, individuals or animals, especially over generations. Marriage between family members and relatives, even siblings. So are there examples of communities that banned marriage to outsiders and eventually encountered a generation of or a period of inbreeding? Yes, some. Now, endogamy, it's called endogamy. Endogamy is the custom of marrying only within one's own tribe, one's own ethnic group or familial unit. Now, to be clear, it's not like there are only 10 people in Mizoram or Nagaland or Assam to be called small to face the dangers of inbreeding, but I'm just saying it's also one of the smallest populations in India, Mizoram. Mizoram's population is estimated to be around only about 1.37 to 1.38 million in 2023-2024, according to available records. So this makes it the second least populous state in India. So it's not like its genetic pools would be affected anytime soon. Maybe generations later, just maybe, if the Mizo gene consistently circulates only within their community, then maybe. But it's not likely to be soon. As some communities, such as the people of Tristan da Cunha, a remote island in South Atlantic. There are also certain isolated communities in Finland and Iceland. They've been marrying only within their communities for centuries. That there are a lot of medical and health issues in that community because of inbreeding, because because the genetic pool ran out and it started circulating only within their community, and suddenly, before you know it, everyone is marrying their relatives and they didn't even know it. But I'm not a geneticist or a medical scientist. I'm mentioning all this only because this question came up, that endogamy and the aspect of inbreeding are often spoken about together. It generally works like this. When a community strictly restricts marriage to within a group for generations, endogamy, it happens so, it can reduce genetic diversity. And this is a fact. This can lead to what is called inbreeding, marrying people who are siblings or cousins or are genetically relatives. However, we must understand two important points here. Endogamy does not automatically cause severe inbreeding. It is not natural or automatic. There are certain factors involved there. Now, if the community is large enough and marriages occur between different families or clans, the genetic pool can remain relatively healthy and okay. Now, problems tend to arise when the population is small, isolated, and endogamous for many generations. So the gene pool constantly travels only within the small space. Now, this creates what geneticists call a genetic bottleneck, where a limited set of genes circulates repeatedly. Now, this may result in severe illnesses, diseases, and deformities in highly inbred groups. And this phenomenon is studied in the field of population genetics. Let's have a look at some of the well-known examples of such populations. Number one, the Amish communities of the United States. The Amish communities descended from a small number of founders who migrated from Europe and have traditionally married within their religious group only. Genetic disorders are much more common among these communities because they've only been marrying only among themselves. These conditions persist because the original founders carried those genes and the community remain closed to outsiders. Number two, the Ashkenazi Jewish populations. These Ashkenazi Jewish people, they experienced centuries of marriage mostly within the community, especially in medieval Europe. This led to higher prevalence of certain inherited severe conditions such as Tay-Sachs diseases, kosher diseases, familial dysautonomia. These are some of the severe conditions. The Habsburg royal family is another. The European royal dynasty House of Habsburg practiced extensive marriage between relatives to maintain political alliances and dynastic purity. Charles II of Spain suffered severe physical and developmental problems, often attributed to centuries of dynastic inbreeding. Now, the family also became known for what is called the Habsburg jaw, a hereditary facial deformity. Thank you for watching HornbillTV. I'm Ngullie. See you next time.